at Black Hawk Middle School. And the first thing I want to tell you about is sort of the situation that we saw as a problem. We have this new tool, NWEA, and I'm pretty familiar with NWEA. It can be a really powerful tool for teachers to use to really take data, to apply it to instruction. But we are trying to roll it out in a year where COVID is happening and has happened, and teachers are feeling pretty overwhelmed by all of the new tools that they're using anyway. And so initially, definitely at the beginning of the school year, what we were hearing from a lot of teachers is they felt like it was just one more thing. Didn't see the value in it, didn't really want to pay attention to the training that they were going to have to go through with NWEA, because here is just another thing kind of on their already very full plate. So my problem practice statement is really about trying to use that cycle of teaching and learning in order to address what I saw from that CASAB as being that attitude and beliefs piece that I saw needed to change. So at Black Hawk Middle School, a cycle of teaching and learning will be established for the 2021 school year, in which math and ELA teachers will use NWEA data to effectively group students for small group instruction targeted for remediation and enrichment, so that all students meet or exceed 1 year of growth in the NWEA MAP growth test for math and reading. We were going to use this NWEA data in order to track our progress. So sort of our standard for when we knew that this would, or when we knew that we were making a difference, would really be looking at that growth data really towards the end. So we entered into this teaching and learning cycle, and I had a bit of an advantage in that we already had sort of established meetings that were set up the previous year that Principal Harrell and our instructional coach would meet with groups of teachers, called it Tuesday Talks, and they would meet every Tuesday during plan time for a period of time. And so we sort of went through this cycle. So by October, sort of our agenda for everything really was, we'd already taken the tests. And we were going to use the data to plan small group intervention. We'd had our meetings with the NWEA consultant, and he showed us how to use the class breakdown by RIT. So each of the teachers is having that information available to them and displayed in a way that they can really see for each individual performance area which students are performing at what levels. And so the teachers had selected a critical standard. And each group, the math and ELA groups at each grade level, selected that critical standard based on the curriculum and what critical standards they saw in like priority standards, and then used the information from the class breakdown by RIT in order to select students for small group instruction. And at that point, the primary resistance to using the NWE data and doing this process had to do with logistics. Teachers were still, I mean, we're teaching in a hybrid model. We have been the entire year. So while there are students in the classroom with you, there are also students who are at home. And trying to bridge that gap between the virtual space and the in-person space and plan for small group instruction where you are going to give your focused attention to a smaller group of students, meaning we need the other group of students to be working on something else independently. We really saw that the planning time for the logistics was what teachers wanted to use that time for most during that initial period. So we had these mini assessments that we were going to have to measure how well the students responded to the small group instruction. But before we could get there, we really needed to overcome that logistics hurdle. We made an agreement that we would all give that mini assessment that would sort of measure the progress for these small groups by October 20th. And that was the agreement that we left that meeting with. And then when we rolled into November, we had completed one cycle. We had data to look at, and we could see using that data what we were going to do to move forward. So really at that point, the conversation with our ELA and math teachers shifted to, what do we see now? How did it work to take this information to select these students? And we had sort of that debrief on that piece of data. we were able to see kind of a difference between math and ELA, whereas our math departments had in their back pocket easy mini assessments that they knew were aligned to the standards that they were assessing. Math people amaze me sometimes because that's sort of their attitudes about it initially. They were ready to go and they had information. They had done their data analysis already by the time they brought it to the meeting. In our ELA department, they had selected a critical standard that's a little more difficult to assess quickly because they wanted to assess understanding of central idea and initially they selected nonfiction text. So central idea in nonfiction text. But then that means that you need your students in order to demonstrate that to read something in its entirety in order to determine its central idea. And so this mini assessment was turning into like a 20-25 minute assessment. And they were like, oh, we need to back off on that. We need to find an assessment tool that we can use that would get that a little easier. So they were looking at Common Lit. They were looking at Newsela in order to try and come up with something that wouldn't take so much instructional time to do a quick assessment on that one standard. But the conversation got to turn to, do we feel like we are ready to move on to a new critical standard? Do we need to try a different strategy with the small group students who didn't quite make the gains that we wanted them to yet? Where are we going next? And it was really looking at the data to see that. And I think we started to see less resistance overall, but then we also revealed new difficulties. So the students who had participated in the process, the teachers who had pulled the small group and worked with them and then gave them the mini assessment and they didn't make growth, that was sort of a new frustration for some of those teachers to have gone through that cycle and not have seen the growth. To ask them to, again, be innovative and think about what is it that we are missing. So how do we go back with those students and look at moving them forward still? So those were the conversations in November. Then in January, and this agenda is titled wrong. It was in January, it was not in November. In January, we had then taken our middle of the year NWEA tests. And our consultant had come back and talked to us about the quadrant chart, the achievement status and growth summary with the quadrant chart. That colored chart was something that sparked some excitement from teachers. It was an opportunity to see, now that we have 2 data points, the growth for students and also their achievement in a really visual way. To help them both celebrate the successes of the students who were making incredible gains, but weren't yet at grade level, and to see the potential pitfalls for students who were already above grade level or were achieving at a level where we wouldn't be worried about them, but were not making growth and were starting to atrophy in their academic skills. The teachers really loved that visual picture. And then that's also when we rolled out using the student goal setting worksheet to have data conversations with the students specifically. And that was the second place where we really saw teachers spark with this data conversations with students. So they committed to having these data conversations with the students. They would tell them where they fell on the quadrant chart so that it was another visual for the students, and then use that student goal setting worksheet with the student to set some goals and talk about areas where the students wanted to grow and what activities or what interventions were we putting in place to help them grow. And also taking a look at the NWEA data for enrichment. So as far as on my CASAB, I was seeing the attitudes and beliefs changing among the teachers, and they were really sort of catching the spark for it. And then in April, we had hoped to be able to look at our end of year data. We're not yet, because we need to do the end of year data after we're done with iLearn. But instead, we got a different gift in April in order to help us along with this process. And that is we were able to look at the FWCS data briefcase. So that has really helped to instill in our staff the idea that the data is owned by everyone. So what I see as the real bonus here is that our math and ELA teachers have been working with the NWEA this whole school year, and they really understand it, but I'm seeing them be experts in the building now that our other subject area teachers have that NWEA data pulled into their data briefcase. They can also see these pieces of information, and they have expert teachers in the building that they can talk to about this data as well. So we're seeing that that is a really important piece to that this whole cycle of teaching and learning really kind of led to that. And that's sort of my conclusion here, is that this is everyone's data, and our math and ELA teachers are acting as experts at understanding what these reports mean, what do these numbers mean, so that they can help our other subject area teachers and other leaders in the building sort of understand this data too. And so they've been able to incorporate it regardless of the crazy difficult year that they've been having. So throughout this process, my expertise with NWEA has been helpful. I've been able to explain some of the numbers and the vocabulary. What is a RIT score? What does that mean? What is a percentile? How do I know if this, why doesn't it have the percentile on the student goal setting worksheet? Well, that's because we want to focus on growth. It doesn't matter where your RIT score is. We want to see what can you do to reach the next one. And really kind of being a contact person, and especially with the ELA department. My background is in language arts, and so talking to them about how do we get the information that we need without taking a whole lot of extra time. Some of my personal takeaways were really around just the importance of that established meeting cycle. We had several interruptions to it. One of the other things that slowed our math and ELA department, or our ELA department down, one of the things that slowed them down was one of our meetings that we had scheduled was the same day that we had a deer in the building. So we weren't able to have that meeting. And so then that got put off. And it was just unfortunate that it was our ELA group that had their meeting moved, and they were already kind of behind, and our math group could still meet in the afternoon. So just all of those kind of pieces, that the importance of establishing that meeting cycle, because there are going to be other things that demand that time and attention from teachers, and we need to set it aside as sacred. And like, we really need this time to look at this data. And if that's already in place, then the amount of resistance that teachers are going to show to that, I mean, it's just reduced, because it's part of the culture, it's part of what we're doing. I also saw the benefit of chunking the learning for teachers. If we had tried to roll out those things that sparked their most interest at the beginning of this process, it wouldn't have been something that sparked interest, because they wouldn't have had the understanding in order to engage with it. So I really see NWEA has so many different reports. So being able to select, like, this is the report we're going to focus on at this point in the school year, and this is the data we understand, and then we build on that as we went throughout the year. The shared vocabulary as well, because NWEA as a tool has sort of its own vocabulary to it. But also, what are we doing in those small group interventions? What is a small group intervention? Is it just pulling them into a group and saying the same thing you said in large group? That can't be it. That's not going to be effective. And our data showed that when we looked at the data. When we then went back with those teachers, like, we didn't see growth here. Okay, what did you do with them? Well, you essentially did the same thing you did in large group, and it didn't work in large group. So why did we think it was going to work in small group? So it's really having that shared vocabulary around what is it we're trying to do with instruction. And then I really saw that highlighting those victories, letting the teachers who felt the spark in January and were excited about student goal setting, letting them brag about it, made the biggest difference really in the overall teacher attitudes in the building. And I really see that going forward. Blackhawk is going to continue to use this data, this information. And now that we have experts in the building, we're like, it's going to continue to be a useful tool for us as we plan our instruction.
Jennifer, thank you.
So Jennifer, I'll say you did a great job. Also, Dr. Sprunger, you're probably thinking,
you probably want to connect with her a bit about this topic, because we're driving MTSS. And some of the questions you're asking are exactly the questions we want to be asked. What interventions work? What interventions don't work? And for crying out loud, why are we doing the same thing when it didn't work before? So those sorts of things. Also interesting to hear, were you having teachers collaborating from an interdisciplinary standpoint?
Initially, it wasn't interdisciplinary.
Right.
Our sixth grade shares their plan time. So in some sense, like we would have math and ELA in sixth grade in the same room, but
Right.
we would sort of break them apart and let them collaborate independently. We did have a seventh grade language arts teacher and a seventh grade social studies teacher approach us after kind of looking at the data briefcase and ask if they can do a lot more team teaching next year.
Yeah.
And that I see as a huge win, this integration between the two. And I think that's a good direction for us to go next. But initially, no, a lot of it was not interdisciplinary.
Well, I think having teachers ask for that and move that forward. So is Blackhawk unique in this? You hearing other colleagues, other buildings where this is happening? This whole use of NWA as you've used it? Was it because you were there, Jennifer, or we have other success sites?
I'm not entirely sure what it is looking like in a lot of other buildings. I do know that I think that the story of initial resistance and then sort of catching on to what it's useful for, I think I've seen that in some other buildings, but I definitely have not seen that anywhere that it hasn't been very intentionally rolled out with teachers. If it was really just the responsibility of our NWEA consultant to teach us how to use the data, I do not think that it's nearly as successful with just those 3 sessions with the NWEA consultant. I think a lot of our teachers then turn around and they go, okay, well, that was great. And they put that stuff on the desk or back on the shelf and don't use it.
So yeah, the small group interventions piece and breaking it down to those areas. So Sandra, I saw your head shaking as well. So what are you doing at Northside in regards to the NWA piece?
I was going to tell Jennifer that I thought it was really exciting throughout your whole speech, or presentation, sorry, not speech, but how you really emphasized what I kept hearing you say was it's teacher driven, which I completely believe that anything that's a professional learning community should, because I had Ramona as a teacher, should be teacher driven. And I mean, you can hear that sprinkled in everything you said. And that's one of the things that I think we could do better here is, like, our math team is the team that I work with, and we work twice, 2 hours a week, every single week. And we speak and breathe NWEA. And what we have just most recently done that ties to Jennifer's is they have taken it to the individual goal setting.
Yeah.
And we really looked at, kids who can self-report have the greatest chance of success over any kid, if you believe Hattie's research. And so, like really focusing in on those individual goal settings and being able to understand. And the hardest part, Jennifer, you probably see this with your whole conversation on those mini assessments. The hardest part for us is what my goal in NWEA math might be doesn't connect with what I'm doing in the classroom right now. And so that's been a real interesting bridge that only teachers can shift to. So.
Right. That was quite the conversation with our math group, looking at the like individual performance areas and trying to select that critical standard. And they were looking forward to the next unit that they were doing as a group. So the 8th grade picked a different critical standard than the 7th grade picked, and then used the NWEA data really initially as just a jumping off point, and then use their mini assessments to really hone in on that particular standard.
Yeah, so that's what I think, that's Mecca. I think when you can go from the NWA to mini assessments that are at the classroom, driven by what is my critical standard or essential standard, whatever you want to call it, that's when we're going to start to see real movement, especially if it's then aligned to, if it can be aligned to iLearn, and that's questionable, by the way. So are both of you involved in the curriculum phenomenon right now, curriculum 2.0?
No.
No. Okay. Because the next stage of that would be assessment. How do we bring assessment to the curriculum and the instruction? So maybe we need some focus of, well, something for us to discuss next steps. And then finally, the next step too, and even thinking what Larry was doing and what you talked about too, Sandra, how do you bring deep learning into your classroom as well? So, and is that really a game changer, just like the mini assessment piece and that analysis and the teams coming together? Are those game changers? So I'm back to, if we use these 6 pipelines, do we have, if you will, themes that happen throughout the year? And those themes are connected to those pipelines. So mathematics might be advanced manufacturing. My theme is this, and it's literally K through 12. And maybe we tap into JA as being that delivery, that mechanism to deliver this across, to be able to scale it. But anyway, need to probably talk to all 3 of you again sometime. But anyway, try to find the hours in the day. But all 3 did an excellent job. I'm very impressed. So
Thank you, Dr. Daniel.
yeah,
Thank you very much.
appreciate it.
Again, thank you to both of you. I know that both of you have humbling spirits, and from principals and teachers that you've had the opportunity to work with. Jennifer, I've heard about you're like NWA on steroids, and that your staff appreciates so much having you there. And they've said to me numerous times, I don't think we'd get this at the level that we have it at now if we did not have her in the building. And Dr. Adams, I know just again with Dave on yesterday, even looking at the curriculum work that we're doing, and just talking even with Jesse on yesterday about how he plans to continue the work that you and him had started at the Career Academy, and the support with teachers in designing those units of study that aligns with that. So I think the question again, I chatted a little bit even with Mr. Kamak, is that I wanted Cabinet to see this excitement. I wanted them to see the learning that takes place. And then how do we keep this going? And how do we really, what is it that when we look at your cohorts, how do we keep you together as a cohort? What does leadership look like for you? You know, how do you talked about the students, and you've heard me say this numerous times, how do we bring your voice to the table to make sure as we're designing learning that you're the students now that's at the center, and how do we make sure that we're meeting you where you are? So again, thank you very, very much for today.
Thank you. Thank
You're welcome.
you everyone for your time.
Thank you.
Ramona, I would also just like to say that now I have hit all of your metrics.
I know, that's why I shared with you, breathe earlier when I text you, because I knew immediately when they said to me that you were in an expulsion, I know you were there like, ah, I'm like, breathe, you're okay.
I know. I'm a type A who pretends to be a type B.
Thank you, ladies. Bye-bye.
Wow, we got some good ones there.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. We're in good hands. We're in good hands for the future.
Yes, we are.
That's how I feel. They are just on it, aren't they? This
Yep.
group of interns. That was last spring when we were interviewing them. We couldn't believe
Yeah.
how top notch they were, and it certainly is apparent.
We have another good group coming along too, because those interviews were really stellar.
Mhm. Yeah.
Well, their opportunity
Exciting.
to do this project, I think, is really a great part of the program, because instead of getting totally sucked into just doing the work that they would do as an administrator, that to do this extra piece, I think is just
Mhm.
is a great part of the program, Ramona, that you added.
And I really appreciate them having an opportunity to come. And one of the things that we focus on is that I think everyone's heard me say that. So we think about our strategic planning. That's the reason I really even buy into our strata component even more. So you could see Larry come into our district being kind of new and kind of how he was leading more from that process. But what we really talked about is you can see with their depth of understanding that they understand change. So instead of just looking at a document and completing a document, they look at, here's what a CASAB does for me, and this is how I would use it. So that's what I really want us to think about as a district, not that we're checking boxes and we have to go through 7 steps, but when you're really trying to approach change and learn what the impact of that change, what tool is it that you need? So you could see for most of them, it may have been like, it was a CASAB, it may have been my theory of change. So you can see that they thought through the process, but they didn't have to have those charts. They didn't have to have the logistics of that. They could speak to it because basically I've used this thinking process to help me move from A to B. And seriously, Jennifer, that's at Blackhawk. I've had emails from teachers. Cassandra is there and she's like, oh my goodness, if we can keep, they like, she could teach NWEA to this district compared to listening to NWEA. So that's the good thing about that component is that it shows us those teacher leaders. When we talk about the leaderboard, Mr. Kamak, and how we have experts through the TMS, we would be able to identify Jennifer as a leader in this district when it comes to NWEA. So regardless of where she is, a principal could say, wait a minute, I want to see if Jennifer has an opportunity this morning, afterwards, if she can help me with this thinking around NWEA.
Well, I
No,
think
that's right, Ramona, because there are some teachers and teacher leaders out there who really rose to the top when it came to analyzing NWEA data. Because 3 sessions is not enough, not nearly enough to teach that whole assessment tool. And there are so many reports, so much information that teachers still need to know. So there's a lot of reliance on teacher leaders to dig into those reports, to figure it out, to see how this fits into our cycle of continuous improvement. And it's apparent that Jennifer figured it out. And we have several other teacher leaders in this district who have been powerful leaders in analyzing the NWEA data. I do hope that we bring those to the forefront and allow them to lead some of our teachers in this work.
And if I've learned anything from Dr. Daniel this year, his push has been on me. And that's again why I want you to see it. You know, I love our consultants that come into the district, but we just had the opportunity to witness our consultants in the district. The experts that can facilitate this work for us, that can speak to this work, can be peer, that can model for their peers. Again, we have those experts that's here. I looked at, when you think about Larry starting at Anthus, they're looking at their units of study. They're looking at assessment. How many times did we hear both talk about critical standards, the assessments that align along with the critical standards? How do we involve teachers? So to me, that's been the push that I've even shared with my department, is that our stakeholders that are doing the work, they're on the front lines every day. We've got to use their voice more and more with their peers. And that's been a push for me that I celebrate, is that when we're designing professional learning, who did you have at the table? You know, and making sure that we have the right stakeholders at the table that can use their voice and take that back to their staff. So again, thank you.
Ramona, that's funny because I sent Dr. Daniel something in the chat while this was going on, saying the same thing about having internal people who can help to push this work along, whether it's NWEA or pipelines or any of those other kinds of things. There's some untapped talent and some of these emerging talent that we have to figure out where the right places are for them and not allow them to get sucked up into the traditional system. How do, wherever they land, how do we leverage that talent and skill set to move the initiatives that Dr. Daniel has put forth for us?
So, you know, that when I heard, well, we could talk about this forever. I'll just say this. They were all on point. And It was like, holy cow, we can't lose these people. So we have to figure out how to retain them and we have to figure out where's the best place for them. And that's on us to do. But we heard using the various tools that Ramona, you've been implementing. We added the logic model, but we probably could add, you know, I will just say the 3 tools, CASA, what's your KASAB tool,
Kasab,
CASAB, your theory of change, your logic model, all that was being driven there. And it was ultimately, this was a project-based learning unit. They
yes,
had gone through this process of, okay, here's theoretically, but now let's take it to an actual event and let's make this happen. I'd be curious to see whether or not Blackhawk scores, what their improvement was over the course of this time, you know, in regards to math and ELA. That will be, you know, if we could make a note of that, that would be something interesting to follow up on. Is there a difference between that building and, say, other like buildings? Which you helped me find that building. But anyway, is it Shawnee? I don't know. Is it Lane? I don't know. Second thing would be in regards to